Welcome to the Equipped Disciple channel. My name is Rick McClatchy. I will be your host. We are here to be and to make disciples of Jesus, and we do that through daily devos, through Sunday sermons, and through other discipleship resources. We are here to equip you to be an equipped disciple. Another day of your daily devos. I'm Pastor Rick, and we are jumping directly into Genesis chapter 4. We're going to go verses 1 through 16. We got the little Cain and Abel saga, so a brother's betrayal. Let's dig right in here and see what we got going on. Verse 1 here, it says, the man, so Adam was intimate with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. She said, I've had a male child with the Lord's help. So obviously, very first pregnancy in the Bible, very first birth in the Bible. And we're coming off of this promise that Adam and Eve received that their seed was going to crush the head of the serpent. And so basically, there's a strong chance that she actually believed that Cain was the fulfillment of that promise, that he was going to be the one that was going to fulfill all the promise of redemption that God had given them. And it's a little bit indicated by the name. So she named him Cain, which has the idea of this idea of possessing the promise, like that they were going to possess the promises of God through Cain's life. And then she had her second child, Abel, and Abel's name actually kind of means like waste. And so, so she definitely had a little bit of a misguided idea of potentially the fulfillment of God's promises over their lives and kind of the time frame. And I mean, how many of you would say you have experienced that in your life where maybe you felt like you had a promise from God and you thought you knew the timing, what would make the most sense, right? Like we always try to help the Lord out with the time frame because we have a better idea of when and how and what and where and all that kind of stuff. And so I think that it's interesting and then a little bit tragic how it ends up playing out in the long run. So she also gave birth to his brother Abel. Now Abel became a shepherd of the flocks, but Cain worked the ground. In the course of time, Cain presented some of the land's produce as an offering to the Lord. Excuse me. So in the course of time, or at the end of time, or at the end of days is how the Hebrew kind of reads in that, is at the end of days. So it's potentially that it could have been like the Sabbath. It could have been the end of some type of period of time, because God did establish the Sabbath rest from the very beginning of creation. So it's possible that they were even observing a form of Sabbath worship and rest. And Abel, so at the same time, Abel presented an offering, some of the firstborn of his flock and their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but he did not have regard for Cain and his offering. And Cain was furious and he looked despondent. So he became downcast. Like his face fell is how one of the English translations reads it. His face fell. Like he was like, ugh. And so then the Lord said to Cain, why are you furious? Like, why are you so upset? Why do you look despondent? If you do what is right, won't you be accepted? But if you don't do what's right, sin is crouching at the door and its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. And so it's interesting when we see Adam and Eve sin in chapter 2, and then in the whole story between chapter 2 and chapter 3, they sin, they hide, God chases them down and finds them, and then he covers them with the skins of an animal. So he was the one that made the very first kind of blood sacrifice to cover or atone for sins. And that word atone is like basically, when you break it down, it's at one-ment. It's bringing relationship back together and making us one once again with God. And yes, the animal sacrifice piece was supposed to be symbolic of what was coming, that the one sacrifice once and for all. We learn all this like once you go to Hebrews, and you can read through Hebrews and you get like this extra, insight into what God was doing and what all the pieces meant. It's a really beautiful picture. And so it had already been revealed to Adam and Eve that a blood sacrifice was required for these offerings to the Lord. And so when you see Cain only bringing the first fruits of the crops and not maybe trading some of those to Abel, for a sheep or something like that, you can see that Cain is trying to take like the efforts of his own hands, and he's trying to come to God on his own terms. And essentially then he got rejected because he tried to come on his own terms. And we came through the book of John before we started Genesis, and we saw in John chapter 14 that Jesus says, I am the way, I'm the truth, I'm the life, and no one comes to the Father except by me, except by the sacrifice for your sins. That spilling of blood that had to happen in order for the penalty of sin to be atoned for. And so that's kind of like this whole piece here, probably the biggest revelation. Like we try to pull the Cain card all the time. I mean, like you ask any number of people out on the street, like the Joe on the street or whatever interviews, and you say, hey, do you believe that you're generally a good person? Do you believe you're going to heaven? Do you believe? And a lot of times people say, yeah, I think I'm going to heaven. Why? Well, because I try to do good. I try to do the right thing. And maybe it could even be a misinterpretation of this verse here in verse 7. If you do what is right, won't you be accepted? But it doesn't mean doing things right. It means doing the right things. We got to do the right things. We got to follow the right pattern. We got to obey. We got to follow what God has said. And so that's the biggest piece here, is that Cain's trying to approach God on his own terms, in his own way, and not acknowledging the path that had been set out before them, because Abel obviously knew what was required. He gave the first fruits and the fat portions. And so he knew very clearly, as you see the whole sacrificial system unfold, it really reflects what Abel was doing. And Abel is even listed amongst the prophets as you look in Hebrews, and also a couple of other places in Scripture where he's mentioned, like it talks about the prophets starting with Abel, and that Abel was a prophet, and actually that even in his death and his blood, carried kind of a message with it. So the Lord said to Cain in verse 8, Cain said to his brother, hey, let's go out to the field. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. And then the Lord said to Cain, where's your brother Abel? I don't know, he replied. Am I my brother's guardian? And kind of the implied answer from God is yes, like you are supposed to be your brother's keeper. You're supposed to look out for your brother. And then he said, what have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Like you can't hide anything from God. So don't waste your time hiding stuff from God. Just be honest and lay it out before the Lord and say, Lord, here's what I've done. Here's where I'm at. Here's what, and then God can work with us in those places once we have a broken and contrite heart, So now you are cursed, alienated from the ground that opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood you have shed. If you work the ground, it will never again give you its yield. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. So it's like his curse of sin piece, the sweat of your brow thing just got compounded, because now there's this penalty, the blood on the land, essentially. But Cain answered the Lord and said, my punishment is too great to bear. Since you're banishing me today from the face of the earth, and I must hide from your presence and become a restless wanderer on the earth, whoever finds me will kill me. Then the Lord replied to him, in that case, whoever kills Cain will suffer vengeance 7 times over. And he placed a mark on Cain so that whoever found him would not kill him. Then Cain went out from the Lord's presence and lived in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Lots of people have all their kinds of theories about what the mark was on Cain's life. I'm not here really to speculate. The Bible doesn't say what it is. And I think if we get a little too crazy with our own human oriented guesses, I think a lot of times we go bad directions, and it's just not good. So, and I don't really think that it's fruitful. I don't think it's really the point of the story. Basically, when you come to God, come on his terms. He's the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through Jesus. We need to follow the path through Jesus. We need to humble ourselves. We need to surrender ourselves to him. And then we won't go and do the crazy stuff that Cain ended up getting tangled up in. And I think that his statement here, that my punishment is too great to bear, I think that is the case for all of us. All of us, with the penalty of sin, is just too great for us to bear, and we just have to get to that place and cry out for mercy and say, Lord, I deserve my punishment because I have sinned and I've fallen short of the glory of God. But just coming before the Lord and humbling yourself and asking for his mercy, and just say, Lord, and so I think that the story of Cain and Abel is one that's obviously just super sad. Like it's just a lot of tragedy happening because of, really, I think the last point today that we'll make is the whole issue of self-pity, because Cain felt bad about himself because he got rejected by the Lord in that instance. But God hadn't given up on him. God said, hey, if you come the correct way, you'll be accepted. So he wasn't saying, building up a wall and Cain can never come and that kind of a thing. But rather than responding to the correction of the Lord, rather than responding to what God said to do, he got mad, he got upset, he started looking inside rather than looking to the Lord and following his command. He looked inside and he started to think about what he thought he deserved. He thought he deserved to be accepted by the Lord because he tried so hard, because he had given his best human effort. And the message for us is our human effort will never be enough. So we have to follow the supernatural plan for salvation, but also recognizing the trap of self-pity when we somehow think that we have been owed something or we deserve something and we don't get it. And then we start to think about that thing and how we wish we had it and how we wish we could have it and how it's so lame that we don't have it. And now because I don't get that, I deserve this, or I'm going to go and do this and that's going to help make me feel better about my place of self-pity. So the trap of self-pity is one that is just an atrocious place for us to be. So let's come to God on his terms. Let's follow his instruction. Let's come through Jesus, the one that stands as a mediator between God and man. That he's the one that ever makes prayer and intercession before the Father for us. It's a beautiful thing that we get to come humbly before the Lord, and that even though we have done terrible things. So take the weight of that human performance off of your shoulders and recognize that actually your best of efforts is not good enough. And we just need to surrender our hearts and our minds and our lives to Jesus and say, Lord, whatever you want me to do, I will do it. So with that, I hope you're encouraged today. God bless you. Have a great day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.